Well, a victory today for reporters and activists fighting the controversial indefinite detention law. A federal judge has ruled that the government cannot enforce a provision that allows the military to detain those who support terrorists and associated forces. Now, those two words, associated forces, are key. That's because the plaintiffs in this case against the government, a group of 7 reporters and activists, say they believe they may fall under this category by reporting on the Middle East. They say under the NDAA, they could be indefinitely detained because their jobs sometimes require them to interact with terrorists. The judge granted the temporary injunction back in May that put a temporary block on that part of the law. But federal judge Catherine Forrest has now made that order permanent. To discuss what this all means for your rights, I'm joined now by Kevin Gostola, a blogger with Fire Dog Lake. Kevin, welcome. So first, want to ask you the significance of this ruling, not just for the plaintiffs, but for the American people.
First, in the last couple hours, I just want to let your viewers know that the Obama administration is appealing this ruling, and that's being submitted right now. I think it's important for people to know as we discuss this that the permanent injunction is being challenged. But I think the major significance that needs to be discussed is the fact that a federal judge decided to intervene and make this sort of ruling on behalf of journalists, activists, writers, to take seriously the sort of fears that they were discussing openly in court, and then to also understand that the government did not meet the burden of proof that this was in fact a tool that could be used for law enforcement efforts, and to also demonstrate that they had specifically laid out exactly how this would be used so that it would not violate people's First Amendment rights or their right to due process.
Kevin, that's an interesting new development that you bring us. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I do want to bring up a quote from the ruling from District Judge Catherine Forrest. It states, quote, "Due deference does not eliminate the judicial obligation to rule on properly presented constitutional questions. Courts must safeguard core constitutional rights. A long line of Supreme Court precedent adheres to that fundamental principle in unequivocal language." So, Kevin, can you talk more about the parts of this law that raise questions of constitutionality?
Well, the main part was these words where they were saying, you know, if you could be connected to being an associated force, or if you could be seen to have provided substantial support, or if you could have been found to have provided direct support to Al-Qaeda or any affiliated terrorist groups that are part of the United States war on terrorism, then that would make it possible for the president to order that you would be indefinitely detained by the military. And what these individuals, these plaintiffs, which were people like Chris Hedges, who is a well-known journalist who has a background of working with the New York Times and now publishes work that's appeared, books that are being published by The Nation. And also Birgitta Jonsdottir, she's an Icelandic parliamentarian. And then another journalist, Alexa O'Brien. These individuals who have engaged in work are worried that by going to interview certain individuals, they could be accused of associating with them because of what they might publish, I guess could be construed to be sympathetic to these people. And all the United States government basically has to do is place them under detention because they suspect something. And then they would be detained for the duration of the time that you are at war. And so that is very problematic for people who are worried about their rights.
And you had just mentioned, Kevin, Chris Hedges, one of the plaintiffs in this case. We had him on the show not too long ago talking about the very thing you were just discussing. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
It removes due process for anybody who is deemed not just a terrorist, but to have contact with these associated forces. That's not a term that's defined. It's nebulous. It's quite a frightening piece of legislation.
So as you just pointed out there, both the plaintiffs fear that even reporting on terrorists could be considered grounds for being detained under this law. Kevin, now that that provision has been blocked, are you satisfied with the NDAA as it stands?
Well, I mean, I think that the main issues that these people were raising were encapsulated in this main section. And I think that, they never were concerned with the whole thing as a whole, because there's always going to be National Defense Authorization Acts every year. It's a budgetary measure that is used by the country. So they weren't just taking a stand against the way that wars are funded, although there are certainly peace activists out there that do not like the continuation of wars. But in this case, they were fundamentally worried about how this could be used to curb people who were engaged in First Amendment activities. They were worried that their due process rights would be violated. And so, seeing that Congress wasn't going to take action to stop this unchecked executive power, seeing that the press wasn't going to pursue their concerns as valid, they themselves decided to do something activist-oriented and filed a lawsuit. And they just so happened to succeed in a way that many people never thought they actually were going to succeed.
Okay, and you had mentioned earlier the newest development in this case, that the government has filed an appeal. Kevin, what does that mean? How do you expect this to play out with that new development?
Well, I would presume with the appeal that we're going to go on to another court. I'm not sure what judge or where exactly it's going to land, but it certainly just emphasizes the fact that this government believes that it should have the tool of preventive military detention in its arsenal. It also is illogical what they're doing. They're making an argument in court. I think this should be mentioned quickly. They've made an argument in court that they already had this power in the authorized use for military force against terrorists that Bush signed, that they could actually detain people. And I think they might have even argued that they could detain people like Chris Hedges if they wanted to, which kind of makes you wonder what the big fuss is in court. But what they're doing with the NDAA was trying to reaffirm it and also trying to make it more apparent. And I think they just object to the judge checking their power. And so they're going to continue because they don't want it to stand that these activists have gone into the courtroom and made it so that they're constrained. And so, yes, I think going forward, we're just going to see a reaffirmation of the fact that our government, that the United States government believes it should have this ability to detain people indefinitely, which is a strong statement about the nature of government right now.
All right, a very important case with very serious ramifications. Kevin, really appreciate you coming on the show to weigh in on it. That was Kevin Gosztola, a blogger with Fire Dog Lake.